Contemporary art is the art of today. It comes in a variety of forms and media. It can be brilliant, but also baffling. And sometimes it's even hard to know whether it really is art.
Come in, I'll get you a cuppa. Come in, I'll get you a cuppa. Come in, I'll get you a cuppa. Come in, I'll get you a cuppa.
You're someone who likes art and wants to know more, but there's a problem. You don't know your old media from your new. You wouldn't know a biennale from a triennale, and you're simply mystified by notions. Well, help is here. Welcome to the A to Z of contemporary art, a bluffer's guide to everything you need to know about the contemporary art world, from artists and galleries to history, philosophy and the art market. In 2 short programs, we're going to turn you into an art world insider. Not only will you talk the talk, you'll also walk the walk. But we've got a lot to get through and not a lot of time, so let's jump straight in. A is for artists. Understanding contemporary art is all about understanding artists, what they do and why they do it. There are all kinds of artists and they make all kinds of art. These days, artists aren't defined by the medium they work in. So instead of painters and sculptors, we have artists who make paintings and sculptures. But they also make all the newfangled stuff using computers, video art and sound art. Now they're simply called artists. Australian artists such as Dale Frank and Julian Marr, who both make paintings, are considered contemporary artists. Dale Frank paints abstract pictures that are poetic, cosmic and slightly mad. Frank's processes are optically dazzling, but also conceptual in that they're made in relation to the idea of painting itself. They couldn't exist without a history behind them. Julian Marr's paintings combine birds of paradise with bottles and cans and cases of beer. They're painted in oils with delicate watercolour-like shadings. They're quite literally about looking pretty, about display and plumage and masculinity. In the wild, it's the male who's always the loveliest. So is James Angus, who once put a truck in an art gallery and who put a hot air balloon inside the Sydney Opera House. Angus is a contemporary artist working with the classic elements of sculpture: space, volume, material, surface. And his use of ready-made objects put into public spaces are sculptural interventions that make us see the place and the object anew. And so is Agatha Gertis Snape, who once made lists of all the names of artists she could remember. She's a contemporary artist too. The work was all about the relationships between people, artists and history. They're a mind map of connections, real and imagined. And so is Soda Jerk, who make videos from other people's movies. The artists update the practice of collage using technology like digital compositing and editing software instead of scissors and paper. And by taking elements of one of the most famous movies ever made, they produce a moving elegy for the lost promise of youth.
The night is bitter, the stars have lost their glitter. The winds grow colder, suddenly you're older.
Artists make all kinds of art in all kinds of forms, and the reason is that they're often searching for the right medium to express a particular idea, a concept, or to make a statement. For good or ill, in much contemporary art, many artists, rather than attempting to master one medium like painting, attempt to master them all. A is for art speak. Art speak is the use of special slang and or technical terms specific to the art world. Art speak is used to indicate A, special knowledge of the subject, or B, an elaborate obfuscation or evasive persiflage, or C, verbal space filling. Art speak is a language that is developed in isolation from the rest of the world, and although it can sound complicated and obscure, very often it's just saying fairly straightforward things. Let's listen in.
You know, in this context, painting's discursivity could almost be considered a kind of performativity.
I think the curatorial premise of embracing notion of the everyday really highlights the localized political impact of the post-colonial.
One can easily discount the notion of the liminal, but I feel the artist has achieved something quite intriguing here. And the sound certainly has something to the overall effect. Ooh.
A is also for art school. The art school is where people go to learn to become artists. They can study the techniques and history of art making, become socialised in the ways of the art world, or become embittered by the whole experience. Many argue that a true artist does not need to be taught, but can simply become a bohemian and thus an artist. If you're thinking of going to art school, consider the following. Many art schools offer studio space. Some are air-conditioned, and the ratio of women to men is 10:1, which is great for both. B is for Biennale. Biennale is an Italian word meaning expensive art exhibition staged once every 2 years. It's an exhibition that shows most kinds of contemporary art. The work is for us to enjoy, not to buy, and the staging of a biennale is funded by governments and or private enterprise and or philanthropists. Biennales are staged in cities around the world. At last count, there are more than 200 of them. They're different from a triennale in that a triennale is held once every 3 years, a quadriennale is held once every 4 years, and an arsenale is, well, you get the picture. B is for body. The use of the body in contemporary art is very common. The body is used as a subject from figurative painting genres or where the artist uses their own body in performance art. The body is considered a location of greatest individual authenticity. So the manipulation of the body as an artistic gesture infers a degree of importance. The body is also cheap to use in art and doesn't need a lot of special effects to look interesting. And if you threaten it, like in this work by Dara Gill where he sprung a rubber band at his subjects' faces, we feel the anxiety ourselves. The space between the viewer and the work seems to disappear. C is for contemporary. Contemporary is a vaguely defined and often contradictory term. Most would think that contemporary means now, and that's correct. But contemporary art is also a name for a kind of art that's been around for at least 20 or 30 years, perhaps even longer. So if contemporary art doesn't necessarily mean the art of now, what does it mean? Well, contemporary art is a particular kind of art that's shown in a particular kind of art gallery. It can be seen in biennales, in art fairs, and it can be a painting, a pile of rocks, a video screen, or a nice meal in a good restaurant. In fact, a single work of contemporary art could be all of those things. It has a history and a series of competing philosophies, and we'll get to those in a moment. C is also for Chinese art. Chinese art is made by artists from or in the People's Republic of China. Chinese art is shown widely in the West. It's great and everyone loves it. And how much do we love it? Over the last decade, Chinese art has grown alongside that nation's economy to become a dominant force in the art world, taking up 5 slots in the top 10 most traded artists at auction, knocking Andy Warhol and Pablo Picasso from their perch. They dominate art fairs and biennales, and they produce bona fide art stars like Cao Fei and Ai Weiwei. May 1,000 flowers bloom. D is for drawing. It's an article of faith in the art world that drawing is at the centre of everything artists do, from painters and sculptors to video makers and performance artists. Being able to draw is an essential skill that not only trains the coordination of hand and eye, it changes the very way one sees the world. Some argue that being able to draw, like any skill, is optional. Why learn to draw when you can pay someone to do that for you? But if that's the case, how do you communicate? D is also for doubt. Can we definitely say that contemporary art is good? Or is it all bad? Are we forever stuck in a mire of relativistic reasoning? Or is it simply just a bunch of nonsense? We may never know. E is for the everyday. A major recent trend of contemporary art has been something called the everyday. Our lives are to a large extent defined by our position within the political economy. An artist wanting to express something about the world they live in draw on their day-to-day lives as the inspiration for their art. And so an interest in the everyday often results in video art of people doing everyday things like going to the shops, walking the street, or brushing their teeth. While these videos may reveal the deep layers of our politicised reality, they're also boring videos. E is also for exceptions. To help us understand what is and what isn't contemporary art, we can draw up a list of exceptions. Contemporary art is not signed on the front, exhibited in galleries that also offer discount framing, seen hanging on the walls of cafes, restaurants, bowling clubs, offered door to door, sponsored by an ad agency, banks, automotive groups, healthcare funds, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It is generally not art that depicts clowns, cats, tugboats, lighthouses, pirates, sailing ships, bucolic scenes, picturesque views, alpine forest or ocean, royalty, haywains, laughing cavaliers, monarchs of the Glen, outback pubs and towns, horses, horse brass, historical figures, religious personalities, living or dead. Unless, of course, any or all of these are exhibited, depicted ironically, for the money, or via new media. F is for fake. Some artists become so popular and their work becomes so expensive to buy that it becomes attractive to make unauthorised copies of well-known paintings, or to do completely new paintings in the style of now deceased artists and then try to pass them off as originals. This is, of course, against the law and can get forgers sent to prison. This can get very confusing, especially in Australia, where we're very often a long way from the originals, and it becomes very difficult to determine who copied who, especially when the second artist says that their work is a homage to the work of the first artist. In contemporary art, originality is a fluid concept. Some say it's overrated, but an original idea can take an artist a long, long way. G is for galleries. Galleries are the places where we go to see and experience art. They come in 3 main types: commercial galleries, museums, and artist-run spaces. Artist-run galleries, also known as artist-run initiatives or ARIs, are there for up-and-comers or anyone else who wants to have a go at making art and showing it. artists usually pay to show in an ARI. They provide their own wine at the openings, pay for the advertising and the postage and printing for the invitations, and they usually sit in the gallery all day long. Commercial galleries sell art by artists. They're really just shops, but unlike most shops, you usually have to ask how much everything costs. Exhibition openings with fancy wine, and they open 5 days a week. They act as artist agents, selling their work to corporate and private collectors. They publish catalogues with essays about the artists and their work, exhibit the artist's work at big overseas exhibitions and biennales, and for all of that, they take up to a 50% commission on the sale of the artist's work. Museums exhibit both old art and new art by artists who are alive and by artists who are dead. They show painting, sculpture, video art, in fact, every kind of art you can think of. Museums organise talks, tours, lectures and workshops, and they happily accept large groups of school kids. Museums are where big travelling exhibitions by important modern artists like Andy Warhol or Pablo Picasso are shown. They hold competitions and prizes to attract publicity and sponsorship. They have cafes, restaurants and bookshops, and the really big ones look like shopping centres. Museums are open every day except Christmas Day and Good Friday. They have exceptionally clean toilets and an open door policy to all visitors. Check websites for details. G is for genre. Contemporary art is generic. It covers a familiar range of ideas and themes, and it gets expressed in ways that are equally familiar. Installation, video art and photography are among the most common forms of contemporary art seen today. Lots of artists paint, but their work is rarely seen in biennales, which is like a showroom for ideas, whereas art fairs are dominated by painting because that's what most people want to buy. It was Karl Marx who argued that taste creates markets and that markets create taste. And never a truer word was said, especially when it comes to the art world. If that bothers you, don't worry. Artists are always pushing the limits of what can be considered art. H is history. To understand why contemporary art is the way it is, we need to take a trip through history. Back before the start of the modern era, most art was about how artists could represent history, culture and nature. There was a hierarchy of forms, painting at the top, everything else after. And there was a hierarchy of subjects, history first, animals, nature and natives at the bottom. But as the Romantic era really got going in the middle of the 19th century, artists began to turn away from the hierarchy of forms to examine their own subjective response to the world as the subject of their art. And so, as the 20th century dawned, the future looked good. But in its first 3 decades, as many as 200 million people died in wars, revolutions, disease, famine and colonial rule. And that's when artists started trying out really radical approaches to making art, in the thought that art could help to make a better world. In short, modern art gave up only being about poetry to become critical of the world. And to build a better world, it would be necessary to destroy it. After World War II, modern art started to lose its way. The sense of possibility provided by radical politics waned as artists tried all sorts of approaches to reignite its radical agenda. The 1960s was the last flowering of modernist art, and by the 1970s, it was almost exhausted.
And what was next was postmodernism. Irony, pastiche, appropriation. Some argued that even history itself had come to an end, and so we all joined hands and began to sing. Kumbaya, kumbaya, kumbaya. Today we find ourselves in a period of deep nostalgia for the 1960s and 70s. Revisiting old art movements, especially modernist ones, forms the basis of much contemporary art as we attempt to define the social and political reality of the 21st century. From paint to video art to erotic pottery, everything is revisited in an attempt to get a way forward from the end of postmodernity.
I is for ideas. Art has always been concerned with the nature of the aesthetic experience and about how our experience of reality is translated into art and how we interpret that translation. That is the basis of all art, both contemporary and traditional, and is called an idea.
As we've seen, the role of art in the 20th century developed into a critical dialogue with culture itself, and art had something to say about its place in time. But the idea of beauty for its own sake never went away either. So when we say something is an aesthetic experience, what we mean is we respond to beauty and ugliness, to provocation and seduction. Most of us imagine that provocation is about art being angry and in your face. But very often, art is made by artists with no thought of being provocative. Others drag morality and the law into the picture. Won't someone please think of the children? Some artists are deliberately provocative, such as when in the 1980s Juan de Villa included elements of gay porn into his paintings that satirised Australian culture, history and art. It was a provocation with a purpose. On the other hand, seduction is the promise of something, the allure of the unobtainable. It tells you what you want to hear, and that's why seduction is usually so conservative. It's all about what you want. Colour and form are said to be seductive, so too the content of an artwork, but really it's an idea, a concept. We want to believe in something. We want to believe that art is telling us the truth. But how that happens and how it might work, well, that's still being figured out.
I is also for installation. This is an installation. Everything was made by the artist. Installation art is a very popular form of contemporary art. But what is it exactly? It can be a whole lot of things in a room, or it could be the room itself. It can include some kind of elaborate physical environment like this work, Mike Nelson's Coral Reef, where everything you experience is the work. Basically, installation is a noun, and you can do whatever you like with it. J is for junk, of which there's plenty in contemporary art, either by intention, such as when an artist uses refuse, rubbish and trash for their materials, or by accident, when the artwork turns out to be crap and is thrown away. K is for kitsch.
What we consider to be art changes over time, as the visual culture of the last century and a half
produced a mad proliferation of images. Some images became so common that they were thought to be worthless. Yet they also tell us about their time and place, just as surely as those images that were held up as paragons of artistic virtue. Of course, contemporary artists have taken these ideas on board, and as in the work of Annette Bezor, they have found beauty and honour in these once revealed images. If you can accept the idea that some art is good even though most people think it's bad, and vice versa, well then welcome to the world of contemporary art. In the next episode, we take a tour through contemporary art, L to Z style. We learn about modernism and postmodernism. We look at art that makes us laugh. We walk through street art, have a glass of wine, and end up right in the middle of the zeitgeist. See you then. Cheers.
Next week, don't miss the conclusion of the A to Z of contemporary art. From artists and galleries to history and the art market. Learn everything you need to know about the contemporary art world.